Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Guerra, and today I have a fantastic guest. This is Dr. Chimene Arfuso Solis. She is a professor and she is multidisciplinary, working in the intersection of ethnic studies, gender and sexuality, and religion. Hi, how are you? So I'm really excited to talk with Dr. Arfuso today. We've gotten to know each other through social media, through the power of the internet. So we've met each other and developed a pretty cool virtual friendship, I think, which is awesome. And so yeah, today we're going to talk about all different kinds of things, and I want to start us off per usual talking about culture because the podcast is really framing the unique experiences and identity that Latinas have. Being from all over the world, growing up in different cities, locations, etc. So, would you like to share with us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I identify as Cuban American, and my dad was also first generation French Italian.
Mm.
My mother and my grandparents came here during the Cuban Revolution, so 1959, or
Mm-hmm.
sorry, when Fidel took over the government. Um, and I was mostly raised in California,
Mm-hmm.
which obviously is not where all the Cubans are.
It wasn't Miami. It wasn't right.
Right, all the Cubans are in Miami.
Yeah.
But so I was mostly raised in Southern
Interesting.
California, and
Mm.
so I predominantly was raised around Mexican populations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So although I was definitely raised Cuban American, I didn't really know that it was a Cuban American upbringing because I didn't know other Cubans,
Sure.
right? Until
Yeah.
until I got older and, went to Cuba and all of that, that
Mm-hmm.
I realized that my upbringing was very Cuban. But yeah, so I feel kind of a little bit in between spaces.
Yeah, I love that. And so, funny enough, another guest of mine, Dr. Grace Vargas, she's Cuban American. She grew up in New Jersey. So, also unique, kind of a unique experience. And her family, I believe her parents left Cuba. They were part of the Mariel boat lift, I think it's called.
Okay.
Um, and so, right. So, again, history is super important, right? The context, the history, how our families came to be, how they arrived in the United States is very important because it, again, like I think it shapes who we are, it shapes our outlook and all that good stuff. So
Yeah.
awesome, very cool. So I'm super excited to talk with you, Dr. Fuso. So if you're listening to this in real time, this is, right at the end of September 2024, and we're getting into uh, Dia de los Muertos. So Day of the Dead is a really important, very spiritual, sacred celebration. So Day of the Dead, it's celebrated in many places and has a few different variations. It is most known for its roots in Mexico. It has a lot of indigenous practices tied to it, Mexica culture tied to it. It's very ancient practice. And this is going to be like a 30-second summary of what it is. So families will often go to the cemeteries, to the graveyard to basically spend time with their deceased loved ones, right? The idea is that they're, for 1 or 2 nights every year, the spirit of those deceased loved ones return to the earth or to this 3D realm, if you will. And so it's a whole process. Like families will go and clean the graveyard, a grave site, cemetery, and you'll see other families all gathered doing the same thing. They'll oftentimes bring food. So let's say, Abuelita really loved her pork tamales. The family will make pork tamales and leave them there at the grave site. If Tio Manuel really loved, a certain tequila, a bottle of tequila we brought as offering, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so people will do that, and a lot of times people will build altars at home. So there will be altars. Oftentimes it includes photographs of the deceased loved one, candles, a yellow flower, I'm praying I pronounce this correctly. Cempasúchil is the flower, yellowish orange kind of
Senpai.
flower. Yes, yes, yeah. And so I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, food. I mean, there's all kinds of different elements. And again, families do it differently. Every family might have a particularly different way of, practicing this sacred time. And for a lot of families too, there is a bit of connection to Roman Catholicism. Again, we have this syncretism, this colonial past that we can't really get away from, because All Souls Day is also like November 1st and 2nd. So it kind of connects to a certain degree. And we can talk about this next thing I'm about to say. One of the things that has been a little challenging for me is to see how Day of the Dead has really become marketed and kind of mass produced,
Yeah.
that's the right word,
Yeah.
commercialized, right? Seeing like, Pepsi Cola has Day of the Dead cans or something, or Doritos is making Day of the Dead Doritos. For me, it's a little uncomfortable, right? For a lot of reasons. So I would love for us to unpack that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Fuso. Yeah,
I'm
to
like,
kind of
girl,
talk
let's
about
start
that.
there. No.
Yeah.
I was like,
To kind of unpack that, like, these practices and rituals of mourning, of remembrance, and the colonization aspect of it all.
yeah, I'm kind of wondering now that you brought this up because you know more about that the religious studies history and that aspect pertaining to Mexico than I do. But I'm kind of wondering now that like I wonder if the All Saints Day
Hmm.
situation is what turned it into like a 1 and 2 day
Could
reverence
be.
situation, right?
Could be. Yeah.
Because like what we talked about in Cuban culture, like we don't have 1 or 2 days.
Hmm.
Our boveda's up year round,
Right.
right? And like we're putting food on it regularly. We're putting
Hmm.
cafecito on it regularly. I'm putting water on there regularly that I
Hmm.
have to clean and like
Yeah.
prepare to and like and it's a lot less flashy than this
Mm.
civilization of
Hmm.
Dia de los Muertos and all of our practices really, right?
Yeah.
Like the burning of different things and
Hmm.
um, all the all the fun things that we find out on Etsy and everywhere else. But
Right.
right. So I kind of wonder too if like that was part of the colonization of it, that it became a 1 day event. Because
Interesting. Hmm.
I remember researching Yamaya during my
Hmm.
dissertation, and there was like this one holiday for Yamaya, and it was like the only time that there was drumming allowed in this one town,
Oh. Hmm.
right? So I don't know. I kind
It
of wonder.
could be. It could be. That's a really great question to think about, like, uh, the commercialization of it, right? I don't
Right.
know.
You gotta go
That's a good
out
point.
and buy your papel picado. You gotta buy your, you gotta buy your plants, and you gotta buy
All
your
the
food.
stuff, right?
Yeah, you gotta
Yeah.
go and buy all this stuff and the sugar skulls and all of this and your
Yeah.
candies and your dulces and all of that.
Hmm.
But
Yeah. It's
maybe
so
it's still
true.
like that. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm fairly certain, like, if we think about like our, ancestors, grandparents, great grandparents, etc., I'm sure they made what they could at home. They offered what they could from their homes, from their
Right.
backyards, etc. It wasn't like I need to go to Target and buy a bunch of stuff, right? It's interesting. Yeah.
They really were, like I think and maybe this is different and you can clarify for me. Like
Hmm.
Cuba, the African traditional religions, like they're
Hmm.
very revolutionary based, right? They
Yes.
were rooted in the transatlantic enslavement
Yes.
diaspora. They
Yes.
were meant to get justice
Correct.
from
Hmm.
the everyday oppression and
Hmm.
discrimination and like violence, right? Like
Hmm.
that's what they were about. So we're talking about people practicing a tradition that didn't have a ton of money and didn't have Target, right?
Right.
It was like,
Yeah.
what
It's
we have,
survival. Yeah.
it was like the plantitas. It was the things that we consider weeds
Hmm.
today,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Right.
It was arroz and maybe, some malanga and some ajo or something and some
Hmm.
cafecito.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I agree with you 1,000%. And so I wanted to share this too in terms of like the importance of remembering, honoring, things like that. So I'm a part of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians in the US. And a tradition that started a couple years ago is that now we usually set up an altar for deceased our deceased loved ones, meaning family, friends, but even more importantly, our scholars, right? Like so scholars like
Gloria Anzaldúa.
people, right, like people like Gloria Anzaldúa,
Gloria, or
Ada
Lydia
Maria Estase
Cabrera.
Diaz. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Oscar Romero, like people like that, right? That have really shaped us spiritually, but also shaped our scholarship.
Right.
And and this is also another added conversation. We've noticed how young these scholars have passed away.
Oh, yeah. I
You know
mean,
what I'm saying? That's a whole thing, like within, illness, academia, the stress,
yes.
all of that's connected. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I mean, okay, so I guess we're tying into grief today, but it's like I wasn't even like thinking about this, right? But like as a scholar, so you introduced me, women gender studies, religious studies, ethnic studies, but the main thing that I sort of researched in my dissertation was Gloria Anzaldua's Autohistoria Teoria, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Which is like this autoethnographic method that's meant to weave in like these ancestral knowings,
Hmm.
um, and to like borrow from indigenous scholar Paula Gunn Allen, right? Like to bring in this tribal psychic consciousness, right? Like
Hmm.
our collective knowing. Um, but Gloria Anzaldúa died young,
Yep.
right? She was rejected from the academy, right?
Yes, she was.
She
Yep.
never finished her PhD at UC Santa
Hmm.
Cruz. Um, she died of like a manageable disease,
Yes.
right? Of diabetes.
Yep.
And like she didn't have a tenure track professorship. Like
Yep. She was on the margins of academia the whole
she was on
time.
the
Yep.
margins of academia and
Yep.
like and yet she's canonical to our field, right?
Now, right? And that's the thing. It's
Right.
always after the fact. Like it's yeah. Yeah.
Well, but even like Aurora Levines Morales, too,
Hmm.
right? Puerto Rican scholar. She's
Hmm.
still around, but she's highly disabled, right? Like so
Hmm.
many of our scholars, like being disabled and like the colonization of our traditions and like the bifurcation of us from like
Yeah.
our spirit connections and like our ancestors and like,
Absolutely.
the things that made us whole back then,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I feel like that's the grief, like the grief of like that double consciousness, right? Like,
Yeah. It's so true. Uh I've lost many, as most of us, I've lost a lot of people that I've loved over the years and things. But there was a colleague that passed away suddenly of a heart attack,
hmm,
young, right? And it was so disheartening for me to see the way most people, not everyone, but a lot of people just moved on like business as usual. They're like, oh, it's unfortunate. Okay, well, who's going to teach their classes next semester? Oh my God. That was really very eye opening to me. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. You know, this really is all about the business. This really is all about the machine. And we are little cogs in the machine a lot of times, right? It was
right.
so truly like eye opening. It was so sad.
Well, and it's like it's so hard like teaching what we teach,
Yes,
and like with like
exactly.
the values, the values of our fields, right? Like for liberatory reasons
Mm-hmm.
for our students, right? And then like to at the same time acknowledge how we're just cogs in the wheel,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. It's
Um,
almost like in conflict, right? Like it feels like, it's rough.
No, it is a conflict. I mean, it absolutely is a conflict. I mean, that's not what our ancestors were doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
honestly like it's the thing. I mean, it's the stuff that our ancestors were fighting against, right? Like they were the first, they were those first victims of like, capitalism or, those the ancestors, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
our traditions that we talk about are, you know, we've lost them because of colonialism, because of capitalism, right? And then they got mishmashed and remarketed and, commodified.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I found my elder in Palo, and he was telling me just how he felt like depression and grief and like all of these things were like soul sickness from
Mm-hmm. Oh.
separate
Mm-hmm.
from our practices. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I just, you said, "Hey, let's do this podcast." And I was like, "Oh my God, the last thing I want to talk about right now is like being a bruja because I feel like the worst bruja in the world because I've just been like
Yeah.
had like the saddest I've had like the hardest summer, I think, of my
Hmm.
life. And I
I'm so
feel
sorry.
but I feel like there's so many of us that are like going through such like deep,
Struggling. Yeah. Yeah.
like grief feel filled like I mean the world is suffering.
Yes.
Our earth is
Yes.
in pain.
Crying out. Yes. Yes.
Right,
Yes.
like crying
Yeah.
and screaming, like, please care about me,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And um, we can't keep pushing through, right?
We
Like
can't with the blinders ignoring everything that's happening. Yeah. Exactly.
we can't keep pushing through. We have to kind of just slow down
Mm-hmm.
and like
Mm-hmm.
wade in the grief. And
Yep.
like I've been thinking a lot about I've been thinking about this book I read a while ago in my
Mm-hmm.
dissertation program, and it was about like alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was talking about oh my God, it was called the negrit. Ne, oh, I forget what it's called. It's like this decay process, right? So
Oh.
think of like, we can think of the butterfly, right? Um, so the caterpillar goes into its cocoon, right? And we often think about the caterpillar goes into its cocoon and then it
Mm-hmm.
comes out this beautiful butterfly. No, okay, that's not what happens, right? The caterpillar goes into the cocoon and then it fucking liquefies.
A gooey, disgusting mess. Yes.
Yes, it
The
is a
chrysalis. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
mess, right? And it
Absolutely.
has to completely
It has
disintegrate
to die.
into goo
Yes. Yes.
before it can be reborn as this beautiful, majestic butterfly, right?
Oh my gosh.
But that's that alchemy process,
It
right? Like,
is.
I think capitalism is like that piece that has us rushing through these
Mm-hmm.
grief processes
Mm-hmm.
and has us like rushing through and like separating ourselves emotionally and
Yes.
spiritually from what's really going on. And like,
Disconnect. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we're not grieving.
No, we're on to the next, on to the next. And yeah, it's so true. Like, when people lose someone, it's like we expect them to like get over it. Okay, that happened last month. Get over it. On to the next, on to the next. And it's awful. And that's why I think so many people, unfortunately, they stuff down their emotions. They develop all these other weird, like, symptoms and issues and psychological problems because they have not taken the time or allowed themselves to take the time to really let go and grieve. And that can be grief broadly defined. That can be, actually losing someone. It can be the grief of losing a job. It can be the grief of not having the life that you thought you would have, right? It can uh, right? Like it can be, the grief of like the loss of a pet. It can be many, many, many loss of a friendship. It can be many things. It can look many different ways. But if we don't take the time to grieve, it does not serve us, right? In the end, if we don't take the time to grieve, it's
Right.
not
We
healthy.
miss
Yeah.
the opportunity to become
Correct.
the butterflies and
Yeah.
And also too, like you said, it causes all of these disabilities, right?
It
Like
does.
that's
It
the
does.
foundation of disability justice, right? Is that
Absolutely.
like capitalism causes the sickness and causes
Hmm.
this illness.
Hmm.
And so, I don't know, I've had a hard summer and so I've just been grieving.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that. So I wanted to mention this, and it's crazy. So one of the episodes that I've recorded and it will be released tomorrow.
Okay.
Uh, Brenda Vaca, she's a poet and author, and she literally talked about a butterfly or caterpillar posted up in her home and went through its metamorphosis, and she watched it go through that and was like, "I feel you, friend. I feel you." And it
Okay.
right,
Yes.
I you didn't know this. You didn't know this because
Is, but okay, but so
that's
yes,
deep. That's
okay,
crazy.
this is what we need to be doing, right?
Yeah.
Like your friend
Yeah.
who is watching the butterfly go through its process,
Yeah.
right? That has been so like, obviously I'm stuck in this capitalist, hamster wheel
As
too.
most of us are. We're stuck in this grind. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a child of immigrants, right? Like if I'm not working like 20 jobs, what am I doing with myself, right?
Right, right. The hustle. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The
Exactly.
hustle life. And so like I've just been doing really nothing much all summer except for like tending to my garden.
Love it.
And like in those moments of like tending to my garden, like like really silly anecdote, right? But like I used to never be able to grow seeds.
Mm,
Okay, like I could grow like easy ones like pumpkin, squash, but then those like tiny little seeds that like are a little bit more moody, I just sucked at
mm.
it, right? So maybe I could blame it partially on my autism ADHD, right? So maybe that's part of the problem, but like because I had to slow down enough, like I actually learned how to grow seeds, right? And
Wow.
but like
Yeah.
tending to a garden and tending to our soul and tending to our grief is like really a quiet,
Mm-hmm.
slow,
It's not a pretty
caldo,
process. It's not flashy. It's yeah. Yeah.
right? It's a
Yeah.
caldo and
Yeah.
a cup of cafecito kind of process, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about sitting and being
Slowing
with,
down. Yeah.
yeah, slowing down and like honestly, I kind of feel like that's where the revolution's at right now is that, like the whole quiet
Yeah.
quitting thing, like, no, I'm
Yeah.
not going to be exploited anymore. I'm not okay with that. And I'm just not going to keep going at this pace anymore. I'm done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And being intentional and essentially like opting out where you can, right?
Where you can, right?
Where
Because
you
there's a lot of
can. Yeah.
people there too, right? Like,
Yes.
who
Yeah.
can afford to like let go of their side gigs in this economy, right? Like,
Right, exactly. All of us have, yeah, absolutely. All of us have these like pressures and expectations and trying to sustain our homes, our livelihoods, our families, etc. It's not so easy to just walk away and be like, "Well, I'm not going to go work anymore." Right.
right. But we can all take a little time,
Exactly.
to slow down
Mhm.
and, take some space, with our garden, tend to
Yeah.
our bovedas, our
Mhm.
ofrendas. And that's where I kind of had to let go. I think this is like where I'm just at in my life right now is like letting
Mhm.
go of perfectionism, you know?
Yep.
And
Mhm.
like letting go of perfectionism and like allowing things to be accessible for me, right? Like I
Mhm.
am disabled, right? Like I
Mhm.
I can't I can't physically go and perform things the way that I used to,
Mhm.
and I've even had to like deal with a glow up as a disabled person too, right? Like, I had a conversation the other day with like, my spirits,
I love it.
about like, Lydia Cabrera's work,
Yes.
right? El
Yes.
Monte, okay, right? So like everything in our traditions is like up in the mountains, right? Like
Oh,
it's
that's
in
right. Right.
El
A
Monte.
secret space. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's our sacred space. That's where the ancestors are. That's where, the dead are. That's where the spirits are.
Mm-hmm.
That's where everything is, right? Is in El Monte. That's where the medicina is, everything, right? Um, and so like I've been judging myself that I can't get up to the mountain,
Oh.
to like go make my offerings. And, I was sitting and talking to the spirits the other day, and it's like I have a sequoia tree in my backyard.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, why can't I just go give an offering at the sequoia tree in my backyard?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, why am
Absolutely.
I?
Mother Earth is happy to talk with you and be there with you anytime, anywhere. Absolutely.
Oh my God, but like, talk about like reminiscent of my Catholic upbringing, right? That I had to go into the confessional and go talk to the priest before
You
God,
did. You had to get permission.
right?
Oh
But
my
like,
God.
here's how like my Catholicism is still infiltrating. I'm like,
You
oh, I
know,
the proper way
it
that
runs deep.
I need to go to a month day. I need to, no,
Yeah.
girl,
It
sit down.
runs deep.
You're disabled. It's okay if you talk to the sequoia tree in your backyard.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Oh my
Well,
goodness.
that's where the spirituality and it leaning into it, it doesn't matter who we are and what we have
Hmm.
accessible to us, right?
Yeah.
It's all connected, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so wild. So recently I was visiting a friend who lives in rural Baltimore.
Oh, okay, that's right. That's where you were.
In rural Baltimore, yes, I was there recently, and it was such a trip for me because I am a city girl through and through. I, grew up in Hollywood, California, LA girl, all the way, and it was beautiful, and it was so different. I was like, oh my gosh, all the tree. I was like, I was in awe of like all the green and all the trees, and
You're gonna leave LA?
not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. I don't know that I'm going to leave the city, but um, I may try to be more intentional about spending time in nature, if anything, right?
Okay, okay.
Um, but yeah, it was so crazy. I was like texting my friend. I was like, "Oh my god, I saw Bambi run by. Like I saw a deer go by. I was like, whoa, that's crazy." Again, it was like a surreal sight for me as a city girl. I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's all kinds of creatures and like woodland creatures out here. Like this is crazy."
Oh my gosh. And like, okay, so that just makes my point, right? I have dragonflies in my
Oh,
backyard that
yeah.
land on fingers.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Have you seen them on Instagram? I always have like
Oh,
pictures
that's
of
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They come and hang out with you. That's so cool.
they come and hang out with me. But like I think that like it's like we have to make our magical spaces, right? Like
Right.
because of colonialism and capitalism and all of these things, we don't have as easy access to this stuff, right?
We
And
don't.
like we can't be mad at ourselves because the system doesn't support us in it.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, kind of double down on the support of nature and wildlife. Is it any wonder why, let's say, the mountain lions are showing up in people's backyards, the bears are showing up in people's backyards in their pool because we've wrecked their home.
I mean, can we talk about the whales that are like knocking over
Yeah,
the like
they're pissed. I mean, nature is
taken
pissed.
out? You've taken a
Nature is pissed. The orcas are pissed. Like, I don't blame them.
no, they're I mean, and like the thing is, right, is like we think as humans, and not all humans believe this, right?
Right,
Like, that there
right.
are plenty of humans that believe
They
that,
care for the earth. Yeah.
yeah, and they can commune with nature, but like I swear to you, it is the same thing as talking to the ancestors and the spirits, right? It's very quiet. You
Mm-hmm.
have to sit and listen, but if
Yep.
you spend time with her, she does talk to you.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
She does talk to you and she does tell you things,
Mm-hmm.
just like the spirits and the ancestors do. If
Mm-hmm.
you sit and you spend time with her, and you know what? It could be your little
It could be
plantita.
your little house plant.
It could be your
It's
little
speaking your language. See,
Yes.
like speaking of Dia de los Muertos.
Girl, you're in LA,
Yeah,
like you got a
yeah.
bunch of room in your yard? Probably not. You know,
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's again, it was a reminder, right, that there's something in us. I don't know if you want to call it primal. I don't know what it is, how to label it, but there is something within us that
ancestral.
desires that connection to
Yeah,
nature. Yeah.
that's our ancestral, indigenous,
Yeah.
tribal, psychic consciousness, right? Like
Hmm.
we want to be drawn back to that because our survival depends on it.
Yes. Yeah, it
No,
does.
I think that maybe that's why we're in a collective state of grief too. It's like, like the heat and like the
Climate
weather.
change. Yeah.
Yes, these
Hmm.
hurricanes that are, okay, I live in the Central Valley, all right?
Hmm.
It is hot and it is dry here.
Right.
This summer, randomly, there was like the weirdest, like kind of like Caribbean sort of storm going on. And
No
I was
way.
sitting outside and like the wind's
So bizarre.
swooshing and it's about to rain and like you can smell
Wow.
the rain. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, no wonder indigenous people on these islands are so in tune with nature
Uh-huh.
because their survival depends on it.
You have to pay attention. Yeah. If you see the water rising, if you see the winds changing, you see the birds doing weird things, yeah, that's a sign. you know,
They know
we're
what's going on. So
we're
why
totally,
are we
yeah, no, no,
listening
no,
to
no, no.
them?
We're
Like, really?
unfortunately we're so disconnected. And I'll say this, God forbid our, knock on wood, God forbid our electricity goes out and we don't have a GPS or we don't have our phone or we don't have our laptops working. We're up a creek without a paddle, right? I mean, again, I mean,
I mean, I may
I'm
go
not
on.
exempt from this. Like, I would not. I don't know that I would know what to do either. Like, it's yeah,
I feel like the time is gonna come where we're gonna send birds by messenger again. I feel like that's
homing
maybe.
pigeons. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just
yeah.
saying, right? The pigeons are smart. Don't you see the videos
Hmm.
of them like kicking the little things off of the building, saying they can't sit there and make nests? They like kick them off too. The pigeons know what
Yeah,
they're doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. Oh my gosh, oh, I love talking with you. Um, so I wanted to let's see. Think about, we're talking about food. You have a beautiful garden. And so I wanted to think a little bit about, the connection between food and family and offerings, this sense of like, especially for, like you were saying, indigenous communities, that cooking really is part of medicine. It's considered part of one's healing, is that, sharing of
Yeah,
different medicinal foods.
yeah. You know, so grief. All right, let's talk about grief. Um, my grandmother passed away when I was 17.
Mm.
And my grandmother was the matriarch. My grandmother, my abuela, was like my mother for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Like she was that emotional person for me.
Hmm.
Um, and when she died, I sobbed for like years about it. Not like
Mm.
every day, you know what I mean? But like every time I
Grief is
thought
so
of
real.
her,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
would
Hmm.
sob because like I missed her so like
So much, so much. Yeah.
yeah, like so
Yeah.
profoundly, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing I can compare it to is to like losing a mother, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Um, but when I found Palo, like I realized how important food was to like connecting with our ancestors. And, it just started by like cooking, like my grandmother's and my grandfather's favorite food.
Recipes. Hmm.
Yeah, and I don't know, but like making my grandmother's like best arroz con pollo, right? And like
Mm.
I'm sitting there and I'm doing it in the Dutch oven on the
Mm.
countertop, right? It's not going in my instant pot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not going in my
Yeah.
crock pot. Like it's on my Dutch oven. It's on
Yeah.
the countertop or on the stove top,
Yep.
and it's just sitting there and it's slow simmering. It's very simple. It's just some cumino, some lemon,
Hmm.
whatever. It's very basic, some wine, whatever. Um, but it just like slowly cooks and it's almost like
Mhm.
a warm hug,
Oh yeah,
With
absolutely.
my
Arroz con pollo is the
grandmother.
best. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so like I really think we underutilize like how much food connects us
Hmm.
to our ancestors and our loved ones, and like that became the place that I heard my grandmother and grandfather the most,
Yeah,
like I'd pull out some salami or cheese or something, and my grandfather would
oh
be like,
yeah,
okay, where's the olives? You
yeah.
know, ¿Dónde está mi modelo? Right? He
I
liked
love
it
it.
modelo negra and he liked it ice cold and
Yeah,
like, you know
as
what
it
I mean?
should be.
As it should be, right?
That's so
Um,
cool. That's so funny. My grandpa was a big Corona beer fan. That was his beer of choice. So funny.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. But do you ever like just crave a cold Corona though?
Of
Like,
course. Yeah, of course. I
like,
love
does
it.
it make you think of him though when you do it? Like, is there ever like that time when
Certain
you
things,
like
absolutely.
grab
Yeah, like certain, for sure, certain foods, certain drinks will remind me of my grandparents. Like, so for example, my grandma, my mom's side of the family lives very close by to my parents' house. So growing up, we'd be over there all the time. It's my Guatemalan side. And it was like tradition to have café y pancito, right? There was always pan dulce or some kind of cookies or some kind of little pastry. My
yeah,
grandma would make zucchini bread once in a while, things like that.
yeah.
And, of course, like my mom, my grandma would sit and chat, catch up, right? Like chisme time. And I would be there as a young girl, hanging out with them too. And so those are really powerful memories.
Ritual.
Yes, it is. It was absolutely a ritual, in their home for sure.
Well, and how many of us have like memories and rituals
Yes,
pertaining to cafecito,
yes.
right? Like I remember distinctly how my grandfather prepared cafe to how my grandmother prepared cafe,
Mm,
right? Like my grandfather was, a Cuban, a cortadito kind of guy, like a little short,
yeah.
espresso with his little electric thing, and he'd zzz with it, his sugar, and he'd have it in the afternoon like a
Yeah.
typical cafecito. Um, but my grandmother liked hers with like sweetened condensed milk
Oh, nice.
or
Yeah.
like honey, and hers was very milky
Sweetened. Yeah, yeah.
and
That's
sugary,
cute.
right?
That's cute.
But like, how often do you have a cup of coffee? Like, I don't know about you. I don't need my coffee for the caffeine, okay? Like, I need it to like emotionally make it through my day.
Truly, it is a part of my ritual. Absolutely. I have a cup of coffee every morning, like without fail. And I usually have a second cup in the late afternoon too. And it's so funny when someone's like, oh, I don't drink coffee. I'm like, there's a little bit of like disbelief. I'm like, what do you mean you don't drink coffee? Like,
Who are you?
who
No,
are you? Yeah,
never.
it's,
I mean, girl, I'm always trying to quit coffee because
I
caffeine
know, I
is
know.
horrible. But it's one of those things that it's such a ritual and like it's so important. So I just have my one cup a day.
Yeah.
But like those are the little things that we need to pay attention
For
to.
sure. You know what's funny? This is kind of veering into academia for a second. And maybe it's because I'm most often around like Latinx scholars, right?
Hmm.
Is the pairing of cafe in the morning, we're writing, we're working, but then after 5, it's the vino or it's something like, something to drink. And it's so funny. I'm like, this is how we make it through the day. This is how we survive.
Well, I mean, also too, you got to think about it. It's medicina again, right? No,
Yeah.
you think about it. Like they had
Yeah.
mezcal, they had tequila. I mean, I'm married to a Mexican, right?
Mhm.
You're sick. How often do they tell you to have a shot of tequila? It'll make you feel
It's
better.
true. Or let's talk about those remedios and stuff. So, for example, like for a hangover, it's like, let's have menudo, let's have albóndiga, right? It's always like, let's have a soup the next day. It's true. Like, there's definitely a medicinal property to certain foods, or they're tied to like a certain healing property.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, I think that that's just like a little bit of us like kind of getting back to like this is what like food like I mean, I don't know, have you noticed like we have so many hangups about food too in Latino
Mm.
households, right?
Hmm.
But like food
Yeah.
is like medicinal, you
Yeah.
know? And it's like we're either like being forced to eat or like under eating or like, you know, just a lot
So
of
true.
disordered eating, you know,
Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And like how it's connected to how rushed we are, how busy we
Yes.
are, and like being able to nourish. And so again, going back to the damn basics, right? It's like
Hmm. Hmm.
I've
Hmm.
been in a lot of grief, and so I've had to like refocus on like, oh, let me just focus on like feeding myself every morning, right?
Hmm.
Just focus on getting that small nutritious meal and like these are the things that we forget when we get caught up in everyday life, right?
Yeah.
Like those little things that if we put the intention behind it, right?
Hmm.
Like this cup of coffee is a ritual, right? This
It
is here
is.
to nourish and hug, you know,
Hmm.
my soul and like, you know, help connect me to my grandparents and help
Yeah.
give me the strength, you
Hmm.
know, for the day
Yeah.
to deal with
Exactly.
the BS that we all deal with out in the world. Because even when we've got our doctora, right? We're what,
Hmm.
0.08% of the population.
Doesn't
Girl,
matter.
experience discrimination.
Oh yeah, it doesn't that has also been that has also been a huge lesson too, is that as hard as we work to achieve that accomplishment, and it is an accomplishment because there's so few Latinas who have doctorates, even still, it doesn't protect us from a lot of things. Like, I'm literally thinking about like situations where physically either myself or another person was physically in danger. They didn't care that we had a PhD. No one cared. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter. And so it's a lot. It's a lot to unpack, to really think about, like, okay, what does this mean to possess this title, right? Yeah.
Right. And just thinking about like really making sure that like we're protecting ourselves and like caring for ourselves in like, you
Yeah.
know, violent spaces that we have to be in, right?
Yeah.
Where we're not always cared for as human beings or
Mhm.
as spiritual beings or as Latina beings or as Latina and disabled beings or
Mhm. Mhm.
whatever, right? So just kind of trying to center back on those things that like our ancestors really relied on, you know,
Yeah.
to survive, right? Like I think of
Exactly.
you know, I always end up needing like surgery once or twice, whatever a year. And like my mother-in-law always makes me albondigas.
Oh.
And I don't know what it is about like the oregano. I was like
Mhm.
trying to say it with my Spanish accent, but you know, my pocha Spanish, you know, sometimes it behaves and sometimes it doesn't. But like, you know, like the oregano, right? Because I grow the oregano in my garden. I know that my mother-in-law grows the oregano in her garden
I
too,
love it. Yeah.
right? And so like it's this
It's
very
special.
simple meal, right? It's
Mhm.
not that complex, right?
Mhm.
But it just like comes together with the oregano and it's like so healing, you know?
Absolutely. As we're kind of like wrapping up our
Yeah.
time together, it's been such a cool conversation. So I wanted to talk about something that connects the forced slowing down and mourning and disability. You know where I'm going with this? Yeah. COVID, right? The Rona, which hit us all like a ton of bricks, right? It totally flipped everything upside down. I don't think anyone really saw that coming.
Well, because everybody now has an experience of crypt time. That's why. It was crypt
Say more.
time.
Say
It
more.
was just okay. So, COVID slowed everything down tremendously, right?
Hmm.
Like we couldn't just go where we wanted to go.
Right.
You know, we had groceries delivered, or we had to go at certain times to get our groceries, which impacted our schedule. So we
Right.
had this like massive slow down of time,
Hmm.
which was like crypt time. So this is scholar. Oh my God. Cepeda, Elena Cepeda. She's another disabled scholar, and she published something, and she was talking about COVID and how everybody's experiencing crip time now, and they just don't even know it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the
Mm-hmm.
big slowdown. Okay, keep me on track. Sorry, my ADHD.
Yeah, no, that, I mean, basically, having to, I think this is part of it, realizing that we are not totally in control of everything, realizing that we have to adapt, right? I think that was a big part of it. It's like, what do you mean I can't go here? What do you mean I can't do what I want? We're so used to just getting what we want instantaneously, immediate gratification all the time, all the time. And this was like, nope. Nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's going to dinner, right? It was wild for people.
Girl, what happened in LA with the pollution? Do you remember? The pollution levels went down.
The earth was thriving, let me tell you. Like the earth itself was like
We're
doing
not
better and healing. Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Congesting everything and
Yep.
like the slow down. So the earth was healing. Oh, okay. So what's the big lesson?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I
Who said it? COVID. It told us to slow down because that's what the
it
earth
did. It forced us to slow down.
bodies need.
Mm-hmm.
That's what our minds need.
Yeah. It forced us to slow down and back to kind of like the beginning of ritual death. I think that was the hard, I think that was also one of the things that was so challenging was just like the magnitude of loss, right? Of death, of like, geez, I couldn't have the wedding I wanted to have. Geez, my family couldn't be there when I gave birth to a child. Geez, I couldn't go see my friend, that we were planning this girls trip. Whatever. That loss, that death, it was undeniable.
And we didn't get a chance to grieve.
No, no,
No, because
no.
it was just move on, COVID's over. I mean,
Back
as
to
a
work, back,
disabled
right.
person, COVID's not over for me. You know,
Mm, yeah.
my family still wears masks. We're
Mm-hmm.
still in masks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, honestly, I just think we're going to see more of this until we learn how to slow down. If you talk to
I
all of
I
the
think you're right. I
they're
think you're right.
same stuff. They're all
Yeah.
saying exactly the same stuff, right? The earth
Yeah.
is unhappy. We're unhappy. I mean, you know, we've talked about mental health. Girl, I love my Prozac, but I'd love to not be on it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Right. Right.
like, we have to slow down. We have to.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah. It was,
possible.
speaking of mental health, and I know I've shared this on season 1 of the podcast. I had a severe mental health breakdown during COVID. So summer 2020, unbeknownst to me, I was diagnosed with bipolar
Yeah.
disorder.
Yeah.
I didn't have any signs or symptoms, not really, right? And then all of a sudden I had a complete breakdown, hospitalizations, the whole the whole nine. So I spent, I mean, the end of 2020 and 2021 and even part of 2022, I would say, literally trying to like make sense of it all. It was like an absolute halting of everything in my life up until that point.
But do you feel
Um,
closer to the spirits and the ancestors now that you've been through that?
Pardon, sorry, say it again? Sorry, I missed it.
Like, but now do you feel closer to the spirits and ancestors after everything that you just went through?
Yes. You know what? Without going too deep into it, there were moments that I am very grateful nothing really bad happened to me because I was completely like unprotected. I didn't have a purse. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have nothing. I was like literally like wandering. It was horrible. And so I know my mother prayed night and day and night until they found me. I mean, wow, I'm sharing a bit more than I expected, but yeah, I was literally lost, okay, for a few days. Um, and I'm convinced that I was like shielded and protected by, all the above, God, spirits, ancestors, angels, however you want to name it, all the above, because there's no way in this in particular, well, there was part 1 in LA, part 2 in San Francisco of of this whole thing. But, there's no way in those major crazy urban cities, we see the news. There's no way,
Yeah.
for me at least, there's no way except by God and by sheer protection, divine protection, that I made it out in one piece. I'm convinced, and I can't, no one can tell me otherwise, honestly.
I mean, I believe it. I believe it
Yeah.
because, when I was a single mom, there a sole mom. When I was a sole mom of the twins, there was more than one time that I thought for sure I wasn't going to be able to pay rent. We were going to end up on the street, right? And something
Serious,
would happen
serious urgency.
to
Yeah.
them that would like save the day.
Yeah. Yeah. The
No,
miracles. Yes. Yes.
but those miracles, I think was a part of my initiation into trusting spirit
Ooh.
and
Yep.
and that thinning of the veil too,
Mm-hmm.
and
Well,
so I think because I know you've been trying to wrap me up, I, I think to help you out here, I think that grief is like such a powerful portal,
yes.
to reclaiming and suturing and
Mm.
repairing,
Mm-hmm.
right? The trauma from colonialism and bringing us back to our ancestor practices. And we need to remember that these are lifelong journeys,
Mm-hmm.
right? These
Mm-hmm.
are lifelong journeys. And I just commend you for I didn't know any of that other stuff too. You hadn't shared that with me. I mean, we got to talk more about
Oh
that
yeah. Oh yeah.
at another time. But I thank you so much for being vulnerable about that because it really is those crises in our lives that
Oh yeah. It changes everything. It does. It does. I don't remember what this was from, but this line really stuck out. I think it was like a comedy thing or something. And the lady was like, "No, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a breakthrough."
Mhm, mhm.
It's like, wow. No, and it's true. I again back to the
Yeah,
butterfly, right?
liquefy,
It's the
right? You have to
breaking.
liquefy.
It's the liquefying glue,
We don't want
the
to
death.
liquefy. We don't want to do
No,
it. That is the part that
that's the point.
we have to, and that's that book that
We
I was
can't
talking
skip.
about.
Yeah,
It says we have to sit through
yeah,
this alchemy process in
yep.
order to metamorphose into our next glow up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we are being collectively tasked
Yeah.
to like the podcast I listened to the other day with your friend, right? Is to reclaim these spiritual practices,
Mm-hmm.
and
Totally.
to get back to equilibrium with
Yes.
nature and with ourselves and our bodies and each other and our
Mm-hmm.
children and our animals and the
Mm-hmm.
butterflies and the
And the
dragons.
butterflies. Yes, I love it. I love it.
We got to remember our magic.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. It's in the moment, it can be very dark and challenging, but hopefully in reflection or with some distance, we can kind of make sense of these moments. But
And with some amigas,
and with
with
amigas to process exactly. Yay. Oh, friend, this was awesome. So as we kind of wrap up our conversation, I could talk with you for hours and hours, but what's one piece of advice you would give to our young Latinas out there? So what would you say to young Chimene if you could go back in time and give her advice about life?
my God, what? Yeah, I mean, I don't. Oh my God. Well, I was always into the occult stuff with with my grandmother's cards and all of that. And I
I love
think
it.
it was just to trust my intuition.
Yes.
Trust the women that I came from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not be worried, and I grew up in a very, I mean, we all still are in very religious communities, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think just embrace those witchy parts of yourself. We all
Mm-hmm.
have stories from our abuelas and our mommies, right?
Mm-hmm.
these witchy knowings or these miracles that
Oh
we've
yeah.
survived, right? Like learn to practice and lean into like your intuition and your body and like and
Yeah.
dance, you know,
Yes.
because remember that's where twerking came from. They were invoking the ancestors.
I love it. I love it. Dance. I'm all about dancing, so I'm with you on that. Oh my gosh. This was so delightful. Thank
Yeah,
you,
this
Dr.
was too.
Rafuso.
Thank
Folks,
you.
oh my gosh, you're the best. You're so awesome. Yeah, this was a lot. This was great. I hope everyone who's listening really enjoyed this episode of the Gold Hoops and God podcast. Again, I'm your host, and I will make sure to tag Dr. Arfuso when I upload this to social media. Don't forget, you can listen to episodes on YouTube, and you can stream them wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Music, and all the rest. There's new episodes out every Wednesday. Thank you. Bye.
Yay.
Okay,
Did you
that
cancel?
was so good.
That was good. We got into a groove there.